I think we're off to the races. All right, everyone. We're starting right at 1 o'clock. If there's anyone who comes in later, I'll be sharing the video later for anything that anyone's worried about missing. So welcome to our second session on our four-part series featuring Dr. Al Condeluci. My name is Oli Backstrom, President and CEO of SCE LifeWorks out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. And SCE LifeWorks supports people with developmental disabilities to work and participate in the community. I'm greeting you from Treaty One territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ochikree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I know we have people joining us from across Canada, across Turtle Island, of course, from the US, all from various treaty territories as well as unceded lands. So welcome to our friends and colleagues joining us from the Canadian Association for Supported Employment, or CASE, Innovation Lab, Community of Practice, community partners all across Canada, as well as colleagues joining us from the Community Respite Services more locally. And a big shout out and thank you to CASE and Joy and Shannon, everyone who's been involved with CASE, who's been supporting us in the Innovation Lab and supporting this project, which actually allows this great opportunity to connect with Al Condeluci to happen. All right, so I'm grateful for the time you've set aside, attendees, to hear more about social capital. I encourage you to be fully present for the next few hours. It can be easy to be distracted in Zoom settings, so just bring your full selves for the next few hours. You won't regret it. Just a note and a reminder, ensure you're muted unless you're asking a question. If you have questions, I actually encourage you to put them in the chat. We won't be answering them as they come up, but there'll be periodic times during the course of the next 2 hours where Al will pause and then I'll read the questions from the chat. And Al, as I mentioned, has graciously allowed us to record these sessions, and that recording will eventually be made available to you. I think I was able to turn that around within a day last week. Try to do the same this week. And once that's shared, I encourage you to share that with your colleagues as well. Once again, thank you, Al. That's not a given, that speakers allow us to do that and just share it so widely. So that's great. Al Condeluci has been an advocate, a catalyst for building community capacities, and a leader for understanding social culture since 1970. Al was born and raised in Steeltown, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and currently still making his home there, I think on Condeluci Hill, right?
Yeah.
Al has emerged as an international leader and consultant on human services and community issues, speaking annually to international audiences reaching up to 15,000 people each year. Al's written great books. Go to alcondeluci.com to find out more about those books and how you can get them and read more about Al Condeluci. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to share your time and wisdom, Al. Please welcome, and please give Al a warm Zoom welcome.
Okay, thank you, Oli, so much. And welcome back, everyone, to our second in a series of four community engagement discussions, conversations. If you tuned in the first session that we had last week, you know that we focused in on loneliness and isolation. And we talked about it generically, but then we really specifically focused in on how folks that happen to experience disabilities are even at greater risk of isolation and loneliness. We talked about the toxic elements that loneliness and isolation bring, and the incredible challenge that that loneliness and isolation generally bring to societies and to communities and to nations. Obviously, the response or the anecdote to isolation and loneliness is building relationships. That relationships are the fodder that lessen loneliness. Relationships are the fodder that, in fact, create more social connectedness, which combat social isolation. That's our focus for today. We have two then sessions remaining that we'll be doing in the following weeks. The next session will be on community mapping and identifying of resources, places, and spaces in community where people gather. And then the final session, the fourth session, will examine the social infrastructure and how can someone be able to connect in, to become assimilated into a community group. And so we'll be following those along, as we've said in our first session, that you don't have to be at one session to understand a second session, although certainly each of these grow and develop. So before we get into our content for today, I did, Joe, want to mention to you, and Ole Backstrom knows that one of my side ventures is being a member of an oldies group called the Doo-Wop Doctors, right? And the Doo-Wop Doctors are myself and my partner who have put together a band, and we actually do performances in Pittsburgh, raising money for nonprofit organizations. And so since our founding in 2019, we've raised over $60,000 here in the United States, and principally in the Pittsburgh area, for nonprofit groups by holding oldies parties, right? And so a new feature for me has been to do a lot of singing. And when I was a kid, I played music and I did a lot of singing. And then, of course, when I started getting involved in my career, I left the music behind and I, started to do presentations and whatnot. But I wanted to just let you know that I have built back my singing chops over these last couple of years. And I just wanted to share with you a little tune that will kind of start our day off today. And it's a tune that we've crafted that we perform from time to time when it's called for. And so the tune goes something like this. Happy birthday, it's Ole's birthday. Happy, happy birthday to you. Hey, Ole, happy birthday. It's Ole's birthday. Happy, happy birthday to you. Let's hear it for Ole. Happy birthday to you, Ole. A little birdie planted that seed in my head, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity to celebrate today on your birthday. So happy birthday, and let's get right into our content for today.
Thank you, Al. I'm glad we recorded that, and we'll be uploading that for posterity on YouTube for forevermore. Yeah.
Anybody who ever watches
you.
the video will be reminded that January 31 is Ole Backstrom's birthday. So anyway, we're going to be getting into our content on the building of relationships as an antidote to loneliness and social isolation. And we're going to start off with this quote. Right? Discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else, but thinking something differently. Right? And most of the people that are on this call, and I know we have, some 60, 70 people that were signed up for today, have, are interested in or play a role, a formal role in advocacy for people with disabilities. And many of us have been at this for a lot of years. Myself, I broke into the field in the late 60s and have been practicing since then, right? So a lot of us have been spending a lot of time, right? And actually disability and rehabilitation and habilitation services have have been offered for many, many, many years. In a formal way, it was actually World War One that created the very beginning phases of rehabilitation in a formal, governmentally supported kind of a way. So it's been many years that we've been at this, yet, we still struggle to achieve the kinds of things that people are asking us for jobs, for opportunities in the community, for chances to live and do and be who they want to be. And we still struggle for that to happen all over the world, by the way, in Canada, certainly, in the United States, and in Scandinavia, in Australia, in UK. And so this quote for me is really a sort of a powerful framework, because discovery consists of looking at the same thing as everyone else who has done this for a lot of years have been doing, but to think something different. Yeah? And that really, thinking something different really is framed more from the perspective we take about supporting people with disabilities. So with that sort of thought in mind, that sort of notion of thinking something different and looking at the challenge that we've looked at for years, but looking at it from a different lens, is the spirit that we're going to be taking today. Okay? And to that end, I want to start with this particular little exercise with you. Up on the slide on the screen, you'll see 10 outcomes. 10 outcomes. And what I wanted you to do is, and I want you to use the chat room for this if you can, and Oli and I will kind of scroll through the chat room as people weigh in. But I want you to look at these 10 items. They're all important outcomes, but I want you to identify which 3 you think is the most important to the people you support, or to the people you know. Or if you happen to have a disability and you're tuning in, which 3 are the most important to you? If you're a family member, what 3 do you think are the most important to your son or your daughter? And so I'd like you to, look at them. There are 10 of them. They're all very important. But I'd like you to identify 3 and put them into the chat room. Okay. And I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of an inventory. We're not going to be able to get everybody's responses, but I'm going to do a little bit of an inventory of what people are saying or what people are thinking is really important. Right? So Ashley's saying to be included, independent, and services. Shay says, Tyler says happiness, friends, Megan, friendships, friends. To be included, Aaron said. Nicole says friendships. Boy, a lot of folks are reacting. Renee just said friendships, services, education. Perstrom, happiness, good health. Haley, great. Good. Okay, we're getting a lot of really good reactions, and as you're weighing in on the 3 that you think are the most important, it really kind of gets us to speculate on this, and I want to kind of look at it a little bit more with you, because in some ways we have to have a a goal in mind. We have to have some great white whale that we're chasing in support of folks that we care about or that we're assigned to support. And all of these things are important, right? In some point or another. In fact, there are some things that are more important at various times in someone's life. For example, somebody who's younger, education and being a part of the educational system. As somebody gets a little bit older, getting a job, having things to do. And one might argue for any one of these things. But I want to reflect back on my own sort of thinking about these 10 items in, my 50 years of providing supports, and also as a family member, supports to my cousin who had Down syndrome that I grew up with, my dad who had Parkinson's, and the support that we were getting for him, and the things that were important to him. And when I filter through all these things, to me, the element that becomes most critical to achieving life goals is friendships, right? A lot of you said that as we scroll through. Now, that doesn't mean friendships is more important than anything else. But the important thing about friendships is that it is antecedent to almost every other thing that's on this list, that it literally becomes a stepstone, if you will, to success in other things. What I mean by that is when you meet with people, when you sit with them and you ask them, what do they want? What do they want from your organization? What do they want from you specifically as an agent of that organization? And you ferret through those conversations. Here's my summary of what people want and what really becomes important to them, right? And as you can see, the gold bullet are higher order issues, right? Healthy, happy, and safe. You hear that from families all the time. I'm doing some planning right now with a group in Rochester, New York, and we're working to develop a gathering for family members in Rochester area to focus in on the question, what happens to my son or daughter when I'm no longer around, which is one of the most penetrating, perplexing challenges that families who have members with disabilities is what happens to them when I'm no longer able to be an advocate, to play a role, right? So these are higher orders to be healthy, happy, and safe. And then the 4 bullets on the that are in purple are really tangible ways to be healthy, happy, and safe. Right? They're tangible sort of steps to that. And as you look at these, step number 1 there and in the purple is meaningful day activities, something interesting to do, a job, something that somebody feels productive in or gets paid for, right? To be able to live where people choose to live and want to live, to be able to get around community, and to develop friendships and relationships, right? That's a tangible stepping stone to success that keeps people healthy, happy, and safe. And I'm gonna show you some of the evidence that continues to be gathered that corroborate that social capital or relationships in people's lives are fundamental to all the other things that people want to happen in their lives, that it is antecedent, as I said a minute ago. And so with that in mind, not only is social capital an elixir for isolation and loneliness, but it also is a stepstone to good things in people's lives: jobs, getting housing, being able to get around, feeling like you're productive, like you're achieving. All of those things are tied to social capital, and I'm going to again show you the evidence on that in a minute. But before we get into that, we've got to summarize that today, in the service delivery system that exists in Canada and in the United States and in Australia and UK and anywhere else around the world, has not been very successful in in mobilizing the kinds of things that people want. Okay? This data that you see is data that is constructed from studies done in Canada, in the United States, and in the UK. Right? And it's compiled in a clearinghouse at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. And Cornell has become this sort of clearinghouse, this font of data. And when you go through that data pool, you find some evidence that we haven't been very successful. For example, those people on the call today who are focusing in on jobs and employment, Canadian APSI chapters and organizations that have vocational rehabilitation as part of their agenda, are struggling. We have made some successes, no question, but by and large, 75 to 76% of people with disabilities in Canada and the United States are either unemployed or underemployed. Right? Underemployment is menial jobs that don't pay a living wage, that or folks are getting paid a percentage of what they produce. That's called underemployment. Right? That only 6% of people with disabilities, and when you look at for example, in the United States, 70 million people report having a disability out of the 340 million Americans that are there. When you begin to do ratios, 1 in 5 people have disabilities. Yet only 6.1% of people with disabilities own their own home. Whereas 69% of people without disabilities own their own home. So when we look at each of these bullets, we see some failure on the part of the system and the part of service delivery in helping people achieve the very things that they ask us to help them with. Right? And the fourth one, as you see on that list, friendship voids and social isolation, we underscored that last time we met. But literally, look at the last bullet on this list, that literally people with disabilities die sooner, 10 to 12 years sooner, than folks without disabilities. Right? So when you start doing some comparisons and you start really looking at what is typical, what unfolds typically in a culture in terms of life success, and then you look at what's unfolded for folks with disabilities in Canada and the United States, we discover that we've really been failing. Right? So now here's the question that plays right into my thesis, and that is, why haven't we done better, and how can we do better? Like, why have we struggled? What's in the way, right? And when I think about that, and as I look in my own lens over my 50 years as a professional advocate in disability supports, I've been convinced that we've failed, not because we haven't tried, and not because we haven't worked hard, and not because we are not passionate or care. I mean, we got, close to 60, 70 people on this call who care. You guys work your tails off. You care deeply that the men and women, you wouldn't be on this call if you didn't care. All right. So what is it? And for me, what I backed into is that we've used the wrong approach to try to get people succeeding in community. We've used a flawed paradigm. Goes back to my very first, quote, right? The lens in which we look at this challenge of helping people be included and engaged in the community. We use a flawed paradigm. Now, a paradigm is a set of rules and regulations that define boundaries, and they tell you what to do to be successful in that boundary. And every industry has a paradigm that drives it. And certainly in our field, in the field of rehabilitation and habilitation, there is a paradigm that undergirds our work. And that paradigm is a micro-driven paradigm. It comes from the medical model. It was born from the medical model, and it is very, very much focused on deficits, deficiencies, and struggles that people have. And in its innards, it separates and congregates people that literally, by virtue of the system, people get offset from community. They get relegated to programs and separate places designed for them for all the kinds of things that they need in their lives: socialization, recreation, vocation, all the kind of, medical and healthcare. All of that becomes parceled out and separated out by virtue of this micro paradigm. The micro paradigm relies on experts to make decisions for people and about their condition. And oftentimes families and individuals with disabilities surrender to the expert. You tell me, I don't know. I'm struggling with this myself. You know more about my situation than I do, so tell me what I should do. Right? That deference that unfolds for families and individuals. And then the final point of the micro paradigm is that it attempts to fix the person so that they can lead a better life, so they can get a job and, get a house and, get around the community and build friendships, right? So all of those things are goals that we have, but the way we try to get people successful to those goals, I think, is blurred and stilted by this micro paradigm. Let me show it to you a little bit closer, right? And this paradigm is still alive and well and dominant in our field today, right? Because the paradigm actually starts by seeing the person as having a problem and struggling with a problem, and actually, in some cases, being the problem, right? And the micro paradigm labels and identifies what that problem is. And that problem is given a name: Parkinson's for my dad, Down syndrome for my cousin Carrie, autism spectrum, intellectual disability, multiple sclerosis, myasthenia gravis. You know all the terms. And by the way, those labels are scary. They're offsetting. They push people away. They prevent social capital, right? They lead to separation, right? And then we do assessments and we do treatment plans and we attempt to fix problems. Now, this micro paradigm really leads to a spotlight on the differences that someone has. When we give the label Parkinson's, we immediately say, well, the tremoring and the stooped gait and the difficulties with fine motor differences. Those are the kinds of things that then begin to define the individual. But those differences create stereotypes as well, especially in the eyes of community. And those stereotypes create a separation. Sometimes the separation is very physical. It's very, very overt. And other times that separation is covert, or it's more attitudinal. But those barriers exist. And any of us that have ever personally engaged disability or personally have experienced disability see it and know it. And any family member on this call will confirm, these phenomena happening in their lives. Now, when the effects of difference are prominent, when difference defines people, when difference becomes sort of a key ingredient that precedes everything else, that notion of difference skews what happens to people, especially in the greater community, right? Now, this list that you see on the slide right now really come from the Holocaust Museum. When I was working on a book that I wrote, this was back in 1996. I wrote a book called Beyond Difference, and I was studying. I wanted to understand the prominence of difference in our field, and so my research on my book took me to the Holocaust Museum in Washington D.C. And in the Holocaust Museum, you know, you see come to life before you how a culture treated difference in very diabolical kinds of ways. And long story short, the last item on this, that is that persons were murdered who had a difference in that society, still perpetuate in more cloaked kinds of ways in our society today. I showed you that slide where people with disabilities die 10 to 12 years sooner. And we used to think that that was because of their, the effects of their disability. But actually, we now know that that's not the case, that literally people die sooner primarily because they're disconnected from community, where they're separated out. Now, having said that, the results of micro-oriented systems in Canada, in the United States, and in other nations around the world, literally end up with these kinds of programs, these kinds of results. So someone comes to your agency and they'd like to get a job and they have a significant disability, and we do our best to try to get them a job, and we struggle. And so what we do is create a sheltered workshop or some menial, work alternative, because we can't get them a job that's more gainful and that's more typical in the community. And so these kinds of products, these are human service products created by us for the people that we serve. Right? Now, this is the question that really, I think, drives the day, right? Is this as good as it gets, right? Is that data that I showed you earlier, is that as good as it gets? Is 76% unemployment and underemployment as good as it gets? And, the answer to this question is, for us, and certainly I'll answer it for myself. It's not just no, it's not as good as it gets. It's hell no, it's not as good as it gets. And that we can do better, and that we have to do better, and that we need to have a different lens in which we try to get better. So as we sit here today and we begin to make this initial segue in our training series from understanding loneliness and isolation to beginning to think about intervention, what can we do to really address that? I put up this little cartoon and say, wait, listen to me. We don't have to use the micro paradigm. We don't have to use the medical model. That there are other approaches that we can use to actually make change happen. Because destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. The choices we make and the decisions that we make in terms of how we A, see people, and then B, what we do for them and with them. And so in some way, I want to shift the paradigm from thinking micro to a community perspective of macro. Right? Now, when I say macro, I want to frame it for you, because there is a macro paradigm that is also available to us in terms of helping people achieve the kinds of things that they want in their life: jobs, houses, rides, friends, right? And in a macro paradigm, the problem is not the person or their condition, but the perspective and attitude the community holds about them. Okay? Now, understand that. The problem is not them. The problem are the attitudes and perceptions that everybody else in the community holds about someone who's experiencing a disability. And the problem rests, or the solutions rest, in understanding the culture. How do we change the culture? How do we influence the culture? How do we promote the acceptance and hospitality of the culture, right? And that the actions, in a general sense, and again, this is, there, you can go all kinds of different ways with this, but the actions to change culture are formal ways, passing laws and regulations, or informally, by helping people build relationships. Because the thing that influences attitudes and perspectives more powerfully than anything else, a lecture, reading a book, somebody being, told, is when someone meets and befriends someone who's different from them, no matter what the difference is. When that begins to happen, attitudes change. The blinders broaden. Sometimes the blinders actually go off. That's the best case scenario. Right? So in macro change, advocates need to understand both tracks, the formal track and the informal track. And we have to be able to organize people for change, for formal change. And we do that through building social capital. Right? Now, today, our time is obviously limited. And what we want to do, what we're going to do, is we're really going to talk more about the informal side of culture change through relationships, through social capital. If we had more time, we could do an entire lecture series on formal ways of changing culture, organizing people politically, passing laws that are affirming and that are accepting of diversity. But we don't have enough time for that right now. So we're gonna just focus in on this notion of social capital. The formal stuff we can discuss at another time, but the informal stuff, building relationships, mandate that we understand social capital. Now, social capital is an interesting phrase, right? Two words strung together. It first appeared in the literature in 1916. And it was an article written by an educator in West Virginia that actually coined the phrase social capital. And what he opined on in this article was the success of his students, his high school students, who graduated from high school and then really had life success in the community. And what he discovered was that the students that were the most successful in the community after they graduated weren't necessarily the smartest students or the brightest or the ones on the dean's list or in the National Honor Society. It was the students who could build relationships, who could connect, right? And so he called it social capital. Capital means value, social means connectedness. And so if I gave you a magic wand and I said you could wish for anything you want, what would you wish for? Here's the three things that always come up in the top 10 of that list, right? If you could wish for something for yourself or somebody you love, what would you wish for? These three things always emerge. They're called quality of life indicators. And these three happen to be the highest quality of life indicators. If you're healthy, if you're happy, and if you're living viably, then life is good, right? Now, one of the things that is really that just amazed me in looking at the literature on social capital is that healthfulness, happiness, and longevity, the three highest quality of life indicators, were all tied to social capital. And quite simply, that people who had more relationships in their lives were healthier and they were happier and they lived longer. And in fact, that's true. All the evidence and corresponding evidence since the time L.F. Hannafin wrote his first article in 1916 to the most recent research today found that these things happen. So what is social capital? What does it mean? Right? Well, it's the values and the benefits that you and I reap from our relationships. It's how our relationships prop us up and help us achieve, right? And they help us instrumentally achieve. They help us emotionally achieve. They help us informationally achieve. These are the three values, the primary values that we get from our relationships. Now, the research also shows that social capital is fundamental to getting a job. That in fact, the most powerful piece of getting a job is the references that you give when you apply for the job. And the more, the references become vouchers for being hired. But it's even deeper than that. Like, let me give this example. I'm very, busy. When I was running an agency, I was very busy with, all the stuff I had to do with the agency and personnel issues and board of relationships issues and then I was teaching at the university, and so I was tied up with my students there, and then my family, my kids were having kids, and I was getting involved with my family, and so I was very busy. But if one day Oli Backstrom would call me from Manitoba, right? And he would say, Al, my nephew is moving to Pittsburgh. Right? He's going to study at the university, and he doesn't know anybody there. Would you help him out? Would you see if maybe you can guide him in some ways that would be helpful for him? So here I am. I'm very busy, but if Oli asked me that, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to meet his nephew. And I'm probably not even going to meet his nephew. I might even hire his nephew at my agency, right? Now, the notion about getting jobs, keeping jobs, job success is tied to social capital. Studies are very, very clear with that. People who get along on the job do better in the job. They advance more. Their pay is greater. But it's not just getting a job and keeping a job. Look at some of these other things that have been tied to social capital in studies that have been, longitudinal studies and social action studies. But it's the fourth bullet on this slide that really is powerful. Look at what social capital actually does. It promotes more tolerance, respect, kindness, compassion, fairness, honesty, helpfulness, all of those things. They're called pro-social behaviors. They go up with relationships. And quite simply, you're nicer to people you know than people you don't know. And you're more tolerant of people you know than people you don't know. And so we know that the more people that you begin to get to know and connect with, the better your life outcomes become. Simply stated, the quantity and quality of your relationships in your life are critically important, right? Not only does it affect health and happiness, but it actually affects life expectancy. I want to Whoops, I thought I had another slide in here. No, I don't. Okay. I thought I had another slide in. Um, I wanted to just mention to you that blue zones. Have you ever heard the term blue zones? I had a slide that I thought I had in this embedded in this thing on blue zones. But let me tell you what blue zones are. And after the call, you might, jump on Google and, and research blue zones. But blue zones are places in the world, and there's only 5 of them that have the longest living successful people on the planet. They live longer, they live healthier, they're happier. And there's only 5 places where they found the centenarians or a heavy number of centenarians, right? People who live to 100 and are healthy and are still contributing, right? And in these 5 blue zones, by the way, they're one is in Sardinia, Italy. The other is in Akara, Greece. The third is in Okinawa, Japan. The fourth is in Nicoya, Costa Rica. And the fifth is in Loma Linda, California. 5 blue zones that have risen to the top. And this research started in 2009 when they identified the blue zones. And since then, there's been a lot of sociological study of what do these people do? Why are they living long? Why are they more successful or happier? Why do they use less medicine? Why do they have less hospitalizations? Why do they take less prescriptive drugs? Why? Why do they have less dementia? Why? Like, what is it? And as the researchers began to probe in these blue zones, and by the way, this was all funded by the National Geographic Society, and the studies go on. In fact, there's all kinds of interesting stuff that you find in blue zone research. But at the end, it boiled down to 4 things that all of these 5 areas manifested. 4 things. One, as you might guess, is diet. Right? Diet, what people eat. Okay? 2 is movement, that people actually move around a lot, not necessarily exercise, although exercise is a type of movement, so it's good, but movement. The 3rd is purpose, a reason for living. Like, why? What's my purpose in life, right? Why am I here? Some of those legacy questions, right? And then the 4th is relationships, social capital. And social capital is threaded through blue zone research over and over and over again. Relationships, they matter. And so with that in mind, I want to make a segue here, right? This cartoon, look at this cartoon. It's 5 dogs in a laboratory. And the caption says on the cartoon, knowing how it could change the lives of canines everywhere, the dog scientists struggled diligently to understand the doorknob principle, right? Because the dogs know that better life is out there when they're chasing the cat, right? But they can't get out. They can't open the door. They have to wait for their master to open the door. So here's my segue. Knowing how it could change the lives for people with disabilities everywhere, the Manitoban advocates for disability study diligently to understand social capital. Because in a way, social capital is the doorknob to a better life. It's the doorknob to less loneliness and greater connectivity and possibly getting a job and having people who vouch for you and people watch over you and people will help you with things and share stuff with you. Right? So To think is to differ, and to think about how we've been looking at supporting people to get jobs or get houses or live more inclusive lifestyles in the community. And using oftentimes a micro model has not led to those outcomes, right? So I want to think differently as we then get into some strategies. And I want to start with poll question number one. And what I'd like you to do is read this question and then go to the chat room and put the answer in. Huh? So a paradigm is a framework to address an issue. In supporting people with disabilities, we typically should use A, the micro paradigm, B, the macro paradigm, C, both the micro and macro paradigm, D, none of the above. So I'd like you to get into the chat room and see how you would answer this question. Okay. So Megan said C, Nicole, Lauren, Matt, Ashley, Matt, Rick. That you see, yeah, you're getting it, and it's actually that's the right answer. That's the accurate answer. It is both the micro and the macro paradigm, because there are individual things that can be helpful. Right? There are things that we can do really for an individual around strategies and around approaches that are going to be helpful to them, and that's been true for you and I in our success, whatever life success we might have encountered. Has been, both the things we learned and, our ability microscopically to embody them, as well as our ability to get along and this external kind of facilitation to help us achieve what we've achieved. Okay, here's poll question number 2. So let's get to poll question number 2. This is on social capital. Social capital refers to A, close people in our lives, B, the people we socialize with, C, those people who bring value to our lives, D, all of the above. So let's get into the chat room. Oh man, look at you guys, man, you're killing it. Man, I should stop right now. I mean, you got it. That's right. It's all of those things. It's D. All of those things bring value to our lives. Those kind of people that are close to us, we call those our covenant relationships. People that we socialize with, we call those folks in our activity pattern. And then people who just bring general value to our lives, people that we know and that, in some ways watch out for us in our neighborhood. All of those are impactful. Okay? So with that content, understanding paradigms, making a shift from micro to macro, understanding some of the basics of social capital, we want to segue into what does this mean for us and what should we do about it? What can we do about it? And to that extent, I want to just go into the chat room now to see if there's any questions or if there are any spontaneous questions that people might have generally on that content before we segue into what do we do about this? What actions can we and should we take? So, Oli, I wanted to just see if there's any questions that have come up that you saw in the chat room, or if we, can ask people to raise their hand if they have a question, and we can do it spontaneously. But let's pause right here in terms of the questions.
Sure. So far, there haven't been very many questions. I know Rick was asking about your source of your data in terms of, the rates of unemployment and so on.
Yes.
I did point him to Cornell University, and
Yes,
I know there are various Canadian sources for that kind of data as well.
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
don't know if I'm missing any other questions, but I'm not seeing any more.
Okay.
So
Is there
yeah.
anything spontaneously? I know we have a large number of people on the call, but if there's anything that that either was confusing or seemingly unfair, or that I said that either jogged you or one, you want to explore a little bit more, we can open it up generally. But also know that I'm happy to take private questions as well. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you my email address and my phone number, so that if there's anything we could talk about or we need to talk about, either online or on a phone call, I'm happy to do that. Okay. But let's segue. Let's segue. It is now at 3 o'clock here in Pittsburgh. It's 2 o'clock for you guys there. So let's segue now into what does this all mean? Okay, great, Al. You're making some points. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, it's all right. What do we do about it? How do we help people get relationships? What can we do? Okay. So here's a 30,000-foot view of the first level of actions to invest in social capital. Okay? The first thing that I'm recommending is that we stop thinking about people from a clinical framework and really focus our attention on the community. Right? I know I'm not suggesting that everybody thinks clinically. I know that there's many people on this call that are thinking macroscopically, but sometimes this clinical stuff creeps in and can skew us a bit. Yeah. We have to understand how communities operate. Our next session, actually, we're going to really drill down on understanding community. We're going to look at that. I'm going to define a little bit right now, but we have to understand how communities operate. How do they manifest? What exists? We have to find ways to reverse institutionalization and micro treatment models, and that is, putting 6 people with disabilities on a van and taking them to the mall. Right? We got to stop doing that kind of stuff. Those are institutional sort of things. That's better than sitting in the group home, but it's still not. It has a lot of residual stuff. Optics suggest that people need to be watched over and that they all need to be together, and it has. We have to just really begin to question institutional activities that creep in some ways into our work. We have to listen really to people and allow them the opportunity to determine what they might want to participate with in community. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little further down the trail today. And then we have to really help people build social capital. We have to understand that in order to build a relationship, you have to be in the party. You got to be in the community. You can't build a relationship just hoping or wishing that you would have it. And you got to be in the mix, right? And so you got to be in the party first, but understand just being in the party is really not tantamount to social capital. Social capital sort of suggests that you're of the party, that people are glad you're there, and that they like celebrating with you, right? And they know your name. They're glad you came. You get acknowledged and appreciated, right? Those are some of the emotional elements that we need to think about. So in a general sense, this is an overarching sort of suggestion. But to drill down a little bit more into some actions, I have a quote here from Lorraine Gutierrez, right? And Gutierrez says that social problems stem not from individual differences, but from the failure of society to meet the needs of all of its members. Right? So this is a macro quote, right? Because that oftentimes we think, well, the social problems of people not being able to get around the community is that they happen to have, they use wheelchairs and physically they can't get on the bus. Well, let's change the buses, right? Can we create a change in the society, in the culture? So understanding community is first to appreciate that definition of community, right? And then some of the key elements of community. So community is a network of different people who come together regularly for something in common, right? So three key pieces of this definition: commonality, what calls the person to the community; difference, what actually happens when people get introduced to community; and then regularity, which is an ingredient that is an elixir to relationships, right? So these three issues: commonality, what is it that the community celebrates that I care about too? Difference, how does difference influence relationships? And then regularity, coming again and again. So we know that anthropologically and sociologically, we know that when people first meet, they focus in on similarities. They try to find similarities. What about us that we have in common? Right? When you go to a party or you go out and about, you meet somebody new, you start searching for similarity. Where'd you grow up? What school did you go to? What sport do you like? That kind of thing begins to create the first ingredients of bridging, right? Sociologists talk about bridging social capital. So the very first element of bridging is similarities. What do we have in common, right? However, when you first meet somebody, you also see their differences, or maybe you hear their differences, or maybe you observe their difference, right? And differences can be overt or covert, right? So an overt difference is something very obvious. So if you happen to use a wheelchair, a scooter, that's an obvious difference, right? It's overt. A covert difference is something a little bit under the covers, right? It's not as obvious. It could be an attitude, or it could be an emotional struggle that you have. It could be kind of an issue that you have to deal with that you don't wear on your sleeve, right? Now, we know that similarities attract and differences repel, right? Similarities attract, differences repel. And that repelling of difference can create a barrier in a relationship, right? So to mitigate the difference, the actual difference that is there, and there are differences in every relationship. I mean, think about any relationship that you have with anybody. There are primarily similarities that helped create that relationship and nurture and sustain that relationship. But there's also differences that challenge the relationship. You say tomato, I say tomato, right? You want to be there on time. I'm a little bit more cavalier about having to be there right on time, right? And anyone in a relationship, that have dealt with those kinds of things where the differences drive you crazy, the similarities, make you feel good, right? So how do we mitigate the differences, right? Now, in some ways, you can try to change the difference, right? That's a micro approach. So try to get the person to change. But most of the time, we're not going to fix a difference or really totally change it. We can maybe help somebody become a little more sensitive, but most of the time it's just going to be for the other person to accept the difference. Now, what happens there is literally through regularity and similarity, right? Regularity of exchange in and of itself begins to mitigate differences. The more I see you, the more your differences don't matter to me. The more I see you, the more your, uniqueness, whatever it might be, is no big deal. The more I see you, the more I like you, right? And more similarities to actually try to find, because that continues to develop the relationship. So theoretically and then interventionally, regularity and similarity become really important ingredients in helping people begin the journey toward relationships. Okay? Now, this idea of community is complex, and I don't mean to denigrate it in a 10-minute overview. It's very complex. Next week, when we gather for our third session, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail. So I'm gonna wait until next week to really get into a little bit more of the complexity of community, but understand the very simplicity of community. People need other people. Without other people, we're at risk. When we talked about loneliness and the biology of loneliness, we talked about actually what happens when somebody is rendered alone, when somebody doesn't have, when they get separated from their tribe. Their respiration goes up and their circulation, goes up, and their nervous system really becomes acute, and all of those things happen physiologically to us, right? We need other people for safety and sanctity. So let's drill into the notion of what do we do with all this, and how can we help somebody that we're supporting begin to build social capital, begin to build some relationships, right? So the very first thing is to think about the fact that people already have relationships, right? That no one starts really a life in ground zero. I remember a couple of years ago, we had a birthday party for this is right before the pandemic, for my grandson. It was like his second birthday party, and we, my son and his wife, they had actually a 2-day celebration. It was like an open house for 2 days to celebrate Connor's birthday. And I went to both days. I was there both days, and as people were kind of coming in, and I just sort of sat back and analyzed all the social capital that Connor already has, and he's 2 years old, right? He hasn't even started to talk, smoothly yet, and yet he has all this social capital. So people they inherit social capital. You inherited the social capital of your family, your mom and your dad's social capital. You inherited perhaps some of your brothers and sisters' social capital. So some of that happens just through osmosis, just being a member of a family and a member of a neighborhood. You automatically become known. You begin to see people regularly. You know that you have commonality with them. You share, boundaries or blood or theological beliefs or whatever, the stuff we share in various communities, right? So everybody has some start point with social capital. We're not starting from ground zero, and that's a good thing. That's really a positive kind of a thing. But the other reality is to begin to think about where somebody might find new social capital and relevant social capital to things they're interested in. And so with this in mind, let me just kind of share the third construct here, and that is the social network analysis, right? That all of us have literally our social capital can be plotted. We can actually write it down, right? We can identify it in a tangible kind of a way, and we can show it on something like a sociogram. So take a look at this image, right? A sociogram. It looks like a pizza pie, right? A round pizza pie, and that outer ring where the crust would be on a pizza pie is your zone of of acquaintanceship, people that you essentially know. You know them, they know you, but you don't do anything with them. Right? These are just people in your outer circle. Moving a little further in, we have the zone of activity, right? These are the people that we do things with. And then right into the middle, the juiciest part of the pizza pie is the people that you love and you're intimate with, that you trust, and that you're secure with, right? That's called your covenant zone. Okay. So now, if you think about this as a pizza pie and you put slices into the pie, say we cut the pie up, each slice of the sociogram visually represents a community that you're a member of. And it's a platform for either building or maintaining relationships in your life. So just look at this pizza pie. Let's say we cut it into 8 slices. The first slice would be your family, right? And your family, think of just generally about your family. What does that mean to you, right? It's people that, your mom, your dad, and your husband or your wife, or your, partner, or your children, right? Those really intense, intimate relationships. And then there's other family members, maybe cousins or others that you see, you do things with from time to time. And then on the far crust of your family slice are relatives that are more distant, right? You know them, they know that you know their name, they know your name, but you really don't see them and engage with them. But they're in your social capital network. You just don't, do anything with them. Right? So that's one slice. Now take another slice of the pie. That's your neighborhood. Think about your neighborhood and people that you live near, right? And there are some people in your neighborhood that you really are intimate with, right? These might be neighbors that you give the key to your apartment or your home to, so that when you're on vacation, they collect your mail or they water the plants, right? You trust them enough to give them the key to your home, right? And then there's some neighbors that you do things with. Maybe you go for walks, or you have, a potluck, a neighborhood gathering, or you do recreation kinds of things with neighbors. I don't know what your neighborhood is like, but there are some neighborhoods where that's very, very active. And then there are neighbors that you just know. You see them when you're driving to and from work, you wave, you see them cutting their grass or doing this or doing that. You know them, they know you, but you don't do anything with them, right? So that's true in every community that you're a member of, because you're a member of multiple communities: your family, your neighborhood, your work, your church, your club that you belong to, if you're taking a class at the university, associations that you're a member of, various communities that you engage on a regular basis with. Now remember, regularity, that's a really important ingredient here, regularity. So here you have a picture of your life, and you can actually begin to fill in the blanks, right? You can begin to identify some of those things. And actually, that gets us then to quantity. Quality relationships are the ones in the inner circles. Quantity are the numbers of people that you know and that you have some connection with. And listen to this. Some anthropologists who have studied social capital and have really looked and interviewed people and measured relationships suggest that the average person, like you and I on this call, have 150 relationships where we have some social obligation to the other person. Okay? 150. Stop and think about it. I mean, I know when I first read that, I kind of scratched my head and I said, holy hell, 150. I started to try to count the numbers of people that I knew. And but actually his name is Robin Dunbar, this anthropologist. He's out of Cambridge University in the UK. And Robin Dunbar has done a lot of writing and research on the quantity of social capital. And you might want to actually look at his TED Talk when you get a chance. Google his name, Dunbar, Dunbar. And he has a couple TED Talks. But he had a book come out a number of years ago called The Power of 150. And in that book, he writes about how he came to the conclusion that the average person has 150 relationships in their lives, right? Now, those are relationships where you have social obligation, not just covenant relationships where you're intimate, but somebody who you'd do a favor for, or they'd do a favor for you. That's social obligation. It's called reciprocity, is what sociologists call it. So in your social network, you have lots of people, right? And the men and women you support who have disabilities have marginally less, dramatically less social capital than you do, right? And in fact, if you wonder about that, it would be interesting to actually sit down with somebody and then begin to ask them about the relationships they have in their lives and how many people that they have connections with, that they know and that know them, right? Now, this quantification of social capital, I don't want to get too bogged down with that, because actually, theory shows and research shows that even, if you have lots of people or if you have less people, as long as you have some people is what really matters, right? And so the building of social capital, the building of relationships, when we begin to think about it from a strategy point of view, begins to say, with the folks that you support, how many communities are they a member of? And can you find new possibilities for them for membership? Okay. And so this gets me to the direct strategy of relationship building. I'm going to suggest 4 things that we can do for helping people begin to build relationships. Right. Step 1 is really an inventory, a discovery of areas of interest or affinity. Who is Al Condeluci and what is he like? Who is Ole Backstrom? What is he like? Right. And so we could take anybody that we support and really begin to say and try to discover, what do they care about? What are they interested in? What would they like to know more about? What do they have an affinity for? And so if I was moving from Pittsburgh to Winnipeg, and I don't know very many people in Winnipeg. I know Ollie, I know a couple of his colleagues, but that's it. How would I build social capital? Like, how would I get more relationships, try to find more relationships, right? So I would start with, well, who's Al Condeluci and what does he care about? And where can he find people that are tribal to the same things he cares about, right? So if I do a discovery inventory on Al Condeluci, I begin to say, what does he like? What does he care about? I can start writing down, well, he likes music. He likes to read. He likes to play golf. He likes, to follow baseball, right? So I could identify various things that I like that I have an affinity for. I can even identify things that I don't I've never tried, but I think I might like, right? So the notion of doing a discovery inventory, we call this a cultural profile. A cultural profile is essentially taking a look at who is somebody culturally. How would they fit the culture? How would they intersect with the culture? What do they care about? So that's step one. Then, once you identify things that somebody likes, now we're ready for step two. Where in the community, if the person lives in Winnipeg, where in Winnipeg do people who like to read? Where do they gather? Right? Or people who enjoy animals and dogs, who enjoy dogs? Where do they go? So you could take anything that somebody has an affinity for or an interest in and begin to find or map that particular resource in the community. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because next month we're really going to dig into this. How can we examine what exists in Winnipeg or in whatever town or city you're in that would correspond with something that somebody likes, right? I just let me give just a quick example. I just did a training session for a group in Brantford, Ontario. Right? They invited me up to meet with their staff to talk about community engagement and social capital. And so, in preparing to go up, they called me and said, Al, when you're up here, we'd like you to meet with one of the guys we support. We're struggling to try to find things for him to do. And, we'd just like, just to have you meet with his team and him and see if maybe you can help us with that. And I said, well, okay, before we do that, tell me a little bit about him. I mean, I'm anxious to meet him and I'll ask him this stuff directly, but tell me just a little bit about him. And so they said, well, he really, he's really interested in scrapping. I said, scrapping? Well, I didn't even know what that is. And so I looked it up and I simply Googled scrapping in Brantford and came a number of different places, junkyard and a machine company that had a kind of a side thing where they separated out different kinds of scrap metals and so literally finding some scrapping potential communities for this particular guy was part of step two, right? Now, I wanted to know a little bit more about him. So when I got there, I actually, spent some time with him and we had some conversations about stuff that he, other things over and above scrapping. But that was one issue. So people have multiple interests. And it doesn't, I mean, even folks that, have been oppressed or have been institutionalized or have been denied opportunity and community have stuff that they'd like to see or try. And there's a variety of ways we can discover. It doesn't have to just be an interview or using a cultural profile. Actually go through a scrapbook of different kinds of things that exist in your community with pictures. And then ask somebody to just point to the picture that they really seem to find engaging to them, right? So it's as creative as you want to be or can be in terms of your creativity, right? So So the notion of step one,
That's what I found.
finding the interest. Step two, uncovering the resource. Step three, understanding what does it take to belong to that resource. What do you have to do? What is inside that community? What are the expectations of that community for membership? Right? That's called social infrastructure. We're going to have our last session on social infrastructure. So we'll dive into exactly what that means. And then last, but certainly not least, is this notion of the gatekeeper, right? This idea of the gatekeeper. And a gatekeeper is someone already in the community. This is my dog sounding off. My dog hears, I think, the mailman or something. And so we'll just let Yo alone. She's, she can't hear. Even if I yell at her, she wouldn't hear me. So, but a gatekeeper is somebody already in that community resource. They're already a member. They already work at the junkyard, or they're already, a member of the reading club, right? And they become the segue for a newcomer. They facilitate the newcomer's acceptance into that group. So a gatekeeper is somebody indigenous to that particular community group that actually would open the gates and say, come on in, Oli, welcome, join us. Yeah, here, let me show you. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're trying to do. That kind of thing. Right? So the gatekeeper becomes a fundamentally important ingredient. We'll talk about the gatekeeper in greater detail in our fourth session. And so, just for today, we know there are certain things about gatekeepers. There's been research done because these are people that change community. They're people that are influencers. They're people that literally other people want to mimic. It's called social influence theory, right? And we'll talk more about that in greater detail in our fourth session. So the magic of community is when similarities really override differences. And we know that the men and women that we support have differences. We know that those differences can be cognitive, they can be intellectual, they can be physical, they can be emotional. And so we know that the differences are there, but we also know that similarities override differences, that people can still be accepted and tolerated and respected for who they are, even with their differences, right? So that's the magic of community, but that only happens through the building of social capital. So let's do poll question 3, and then we'll open this up to general questions, like we said. So poll question 3 is, the 2 ingredients to promote social capital in the community are A, money and power, B, micro and macro issues, C, similarities and regularity, D, skills and competencies. So you know the drill. Jump into the chat room and weigh in. And you're doing it. Wow, Nikki, Kaylee, Ashley, Tammy, Linda, all saying C. And you're absolutely correct. That similarity and regularity become these incredibly important ingredients. When I was working on this book I mentioned earlier called Beyond Difference, this is the book that when we were talking about the Holocaust Museum, this is one of the findings, right? Like, and just in looking at what allows us to get beyond difference as human beings, because difference is a showstopper. I mean, difference will stop the show. If you see something that you don't understand, or your very first reaction is to back away and try to figure out, is this going to hurt me, or is this going to be something that will be a liability, right? I mean, that's a human defense mechanism. So difference is natural in community. What becomes important is how do we get beyond difference? Not how do we fix it, not how do we mitigate it, not how do we try to cloak it. How do we get beyond it? Right. And so similarity and regularity become the two most powerful ingredients for that to happen. Right? Great. So now let's go to poll question number 4. And that is, gatekeepers in community are people who are A, indigenous, already a member, B, willing to take social risks, C, somebody who's open and accessible, D, all of the above. Okay, into the chat room, and here we go. Great Dawn, Nicole, Lynn, Lauren, Lynn. Got it. D. The answer is D. Kim, Allison. Yeah. I mean, that notion of gatekeepers is something we're really going to drill down in session 4. And in fact, what we're going to do in session 4 is I'm going to actually give you a little test called people awareness. And on the test, we're going to actually ask you to take a look at your own bents. You know, what kind of person are you? I'm going to give you 40 variables in which to sort of assess your own personality, if you will. And then we're going to back into the ones that really relate to gatekeepers. So with that in mind, this notion of gatekeepers, let me kind of pull this content to a close and then really open it up for any reactions or questions or comments that you might have about some of these strategies of discovery, using a cultural profile, these strategies of assessing community, these strategies of understanding community infrastructure, these strategies of finding gatekeepers. Because he who would be a leader, let him first become a bridge, right? And remember, I talked about bridging social capital. There are 2 types of social capital: bridging and bonding, right? Bridging social capital is when you find those similarities that literally create some energy between you and the other person, right? Bonding social capital is when those similarities really, really begin to gel between, the two of you, and you begin to bond. And bonding moves into covenancy, right? Bonding relationships tend to become covenant relationships, relationships that are intimate, that are really deeply trusting kinds of relationships. So the notion of bridging is kind of an interesting metaphor for understanding social capital. And this little poem I want to leave you with is a poem that it's called The Bridge Builder, right? It goes like this: an old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast, deep, and wide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. That sullen stream held no fear for him. But he turned when safe on the other side, and he built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your time with building here. You never again will pass this way. Your journey will end at the close of this day. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why are you building this bridge at eventide? The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the way that I've come, he said, there follows after me this day a youth whose feet must pass this way. This stream, which has been nothing to me, to the fair-haired youth might a pitfall be. And yes, he too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building this bridge for him. Huh? I love this poem, right? Because it's a metaphor for life, I believe. It's a metaphor for the challenges of life that every one of us on this call have experienced, right? And it also is a clarion call for what do we need to do for our brothers and our sisters, right? So here's the builder. He crosses the chasm, he's successful, he gets to the other side, and he begins to build a bridge back across. And the pilgrim thinks he's crazy. The pilgrim says, What are you doing? Like, why are you going back? Who would want to go back there? Back there is loneliness and unemployment and, and devaluation. And I don't want to, you've made it. Why are you wanting to go back? And he said, I'm not building the bridge for me to go back. I'm building this bridge so that folks who struggle a bit more than I did can come a little easier, right? And in some ways, that's our job. That's your job, is to create an opportunity for somebody to make it in community, right? And making it in community is about building relationships. That's how we make it in community. And so, with that in mind, let me just finish up this. Here's a little image of a bridge walking into the sunlight. You can see all the all the other kinds of subliminal positives of this. But this quote by Gandhi is one that I know and you've heard probably many times before. But if we want an inclusive community, we've got to be inclusive. We have to become the change we hope to create. If we want a tolerant community, then we have to be tolerant, and we have to, and ways to become tolerant is to get to know people. As we get to know them, our tolerance automatically it grows. So there's our compassion, right? So that notion of getting to know people. So here's my last slide. I love this little cartoon. Look at these spiders, right? They're on a sliding board. They know that the web will catch flies, but these flies actually have raised their vision, and they think they'll catch a kid. And the one spider says to the other, "If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings," right? And you gotta love the optimism of these spiders, right? And in some ways, that's the same optimism I'm promoting here in this talk. Is we've got to understand that building social capital is something anyone should have the opportunity, everyone should have the opportunity to do. And it takes two to tango, that this is a two-way street, and that one step is getting there, and the other step is the other person saying, "Come on in, welcome." And it's incumbent upon us to really create the segue for that to happen. Now, there's some coaching that we can do and some things, and we'll cover all that when we get into infrastructure, because when we talk about community infrastructure, we're going to talk about what is expected in community and what are some of the things that somebody typically has to do to become a member of something, right? And we're going to look at this from your own experience. How did you get accepted? How did you become a member? If you're a member of something, how did you become that member? What did it take? What unfolded for you, right? And as we think about those things and we begin to say, what are some of the strategies, micro and macro, we can utilize so that the men and women and children that we support who happen to experience disabilities can, in fact, be positioned to be accepted and be incorporated, right? So this macro piece of the puzzle is absolutely critical. That if we don't tend to this, we'll never have an inclusive society. If we don't tend to the macro side of the cup, we can't just expect it to happen. We've got to set the stage for it to happen. And those are some of the things that we're gonna explore more vigorously in our sessions 3 and 4. So with that in mind, let me do this. Let me oh, I have one more quote here. I forgot. And this will end us. This is a quote from Dr. King, by the way, Dr. Martin Luther King. This comes from an essay that Dr. King wrote in 1963. He wrote it in the Birmingham jail. He had been arrested because he was trying to order a sandwich in a restaurant that said no coloreds allowed. That's a day of Jim Crow in the United States, and we still have, extreme racism in the United States, but that was such overt racism. And Dr. King was arrested in this restaurant. He ended up being sentenced to 6 months in the Birmingham jail. But when he was in the jail in Birmingham, he wrote probably one of his finest essays. And this is just a piece of the essay. The essay is called Notes from a Birmingham Jail. If you have time, it's worth reading. But Dr. King in this passage says, in a new sense, all life is interrelated. All persons are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Now, Dr. King is saying that the men and women that we support are not our clients, and they're not participants, and they're not consumers, and they're not patients. They're our brothers and our sisters. And if they're in the line to be devalued, anybody can be devalued, right? And so what Dr. King is really reminding us all is we're all linked together. We're in this sort of garment of destiny tied to mutuality, right? So let me just get into, here's my last slide. And as I promised, I was going to give you my email address, which is Al Condeluci at alcondeluci.com, and my phone number, which you see right there. If you have a question or if you'd like to engage, offline, so to speak, I'm happy to do that. And I told Oli, I'd look forward to those kind of conversations if they unfold. So you could get in touch with me, but what I'd like to do now is actually stop sharing the slides and open this up. And Oli and I will then have an opportunity to see if there's anything in the chat room or any questions that you have, spontaneously to any of the content that we looked at, or any of the references that I talked about, or any of the intervention strategies that I suggested. So let's do that. We have a little bit of time, and it's about 2:45, and so is there anything in the chat room, Oli?
There is some great dialogue and questions here. I'm going to start in the most recent and work my way back. I think there's a couple of new comments. I'll have to check those too. But and Cresta asks, with regard to your what you were talking about with regard to gatekeepers, what about gatekeepers that are not open and accessible? I'll read you some of the responses to that and then let you go. We have a group in our boardroom that responded, then we don't want to communicate with them, but an opportunity to advocate and educate. I think that's communicating with them. And then Kim chimed in, are they true gatekeepers then? And Jennifer chimed in, I agree with Kim, then they're probably not true gatekeepers. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And they are gatekeepers. They're negative gatekeepers. because gatekeepers can be positive or negative. And in fact, in most group analysis, you have some people who are just naturally, open and receptive, and then you have some other people, in fact, even a little bit more, who are negative, who are close the gates, and then you have the majority of people in the middle who really aren't, they sort of just kind of follow a leader in terms of how they perceive something. And so I used to be, in my earlier years as an advocate, I used to really fight with those negative gatekeepers and people with closed minds, and I would, argue, and I would, try to get people to open up to understand, or try to adjust perhaps in their thinking. And then I saw a cartoon. I showed you a couple of the cartoons earlier in this. I found a Gary Larson cartoon. Let me describe it to you. I can't easily put it up, but let me describe it. It's a classic Far Side cartoon, and in the cartoon, it's God, the caricature of God, and he's at a cooking table, right? And on the table, he has the earth that is in front of him, and then beside the earth, he has these little, they look like salt shakers, and each of the salt shakers is labeled. Like one says trees, another salt shaker says insects, the third salt shaker said ocean. A fourth salt shaker, said animals. And God is holding a salt shaker, and on that salt shaker it says jerks, right? And God's sprinkling that onto the earth, and the caption says, just to make it interesting, right? So when I saw that cartoon, it really mellowed me, because there are some people who are never ever going to change. That their negativity, or their I don't know, selfishness, or their whatever, is just who they are. And so after I saw that cartoon, and I reflected on this very point that was raised in the question, Oli. I I I started to say, wait a second, what I ought to do is try to find the positive gatekeepers. Just let the negative gatekeepers be. I'm not going to change them. They're going to be who they are. What I'm going to appeal to are the positive gatekeepers. I'm going to try to find people who are willing to open up the gates and to be more accepting and respecting of people. And I'm going to hope that when I find those people and they begin to demonstrate that, that will influence the neutral people in the group, and they'll shift to the positive side. And all we need is a critical mass. We don't need everybody in a community or a group to agree. We just need a critical mass of people being willing. And even in the end, there are some people who probably never going to be accepting, and that's okay. They're there. I mean, what are you going to do? God will deal with them later when they, when they have to, they have their judgment. But the notion for us is, as advocates, we have limited time, we have limited energy. So I say, don't fight with the negative people. Just let them be. Find the positive people and enlist them, incorporate them, encourage them to play a part of this inclusive journey that we're on. So great question. Thank you for raising that. Just look for it was a similar. There's a famous meme with Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers saying that when he was a young boy and he would see something bad happen, and he would really be upset by that, his mother said, look for the helpers, right? Just look for the helpers. and that will lift you up, right? And he often repeated that. Look for the helpers. Look for the positive people. Next question, Holly.
Joy, were you going to chime in on that topic?
So interesting because it actually is, but it's a personal experience. Um, so few of you might know this about me, but I used to, I still, I'm an equestrian, but 30 years ago, I rode at a national and international level. Since that, I've had many injuries and I ride very poorly. In fact, I live with irrational fear, which drives me insane. But the point of the story is that getting back into riding consistently, I went to a group of riders that have a coach that it's a beginner riding lesson. And when I showed up there, all excited to get started, they said, "Oh, no, this isn't the group for you." And so the gatekeeper was the coach who recognized me from riding at a different time in my life and didn't want, I don't know whether it was just didn't feel like she was comfortable coaching me, or maybe that she thought I was going to take over the group or whatever. So I said, no, that this isn't where you need to be. So I left there and I joined after 3 or 4 months, I joined another group that was a Paralympic group. And so I showed up, got on and was going to ride. And the coach told me, no, you don't belong here. You need to go somewhere else. The gatekeeper again told me I wasn't the right person. But the interesting thing there was the para rider said, "Oh, anybody can be part of this group. Anyone can join in. You stay, you ride." And although I was feeling uncomfortable because I'd been told to leave, I did stay. I was a part of that group for about 2.5 years, which helped me gain my confidence. And it was a wonderful experience. And the gatekeeper realized that she wasn't just the gatekeeper. Everyone in the group was the gatekeeper, and that their influence changed her attitude towards me. And I guess maybe she was more comfortable because I wasn't planning on taking over the group. But I think people experiencing disability often feel the same way when they join groups, that they're not necessarily embraced to join the group, and they kind of leave because they don't feel welcomed,
Right.
wholly welcomed.
Yeah.
I've been a member, like I say, of the equestrian world for over 60 years. And I always feel welcome when I go to Spruce Meadows or to Woodbine or to wherever I go to. People know me. But just getting back into riding was a real challenge. So I can appreciate, and whenever I have the opportunity to meet and to bring people into my groups of my circles, it's an opportunity for me to really feel like I can be a gatekeeper. I can welcome people and truly give them my attention so that they feel like they're a valued part of my communities, no matter what it is, not just work, but no matter what communities that I'm a part of. So I don't know if it was even relevant, and I'm sorry I took up time if it's not.
No, it is relevant, Joy. It's a great story because it really does. It's a story of social influence, and the notion of how do we get to a greater greater community connectivity, and that happens. It happens slow. Sometimes there's a backslide, and then there's a couple steps forward, and then one more step back, and then so it's a journey, and it's not an ultimate destination. It's a constant journey, and relationships as well require nurturing, require continued investment that we make. That we don't reach the pinnacle and say, okay, we made it. We have social capital. We just have to constantly be working on it. That's what's so wonderful about it, and that's also what's so challenging about it. And it also is a construct for all people. This is not a disability strategy. This is a human relations strategy for any of us, all of us. And every person on this call could learn something, or hopefully be able to use something in their own life, in their own journey in life. And so I think it's so universal. And that's what really got me about it. It's not like we're talking about this for those disabled people. Nah, man, we're talking about this for us, about us, about it's our community. How do we make it better?
Great.
Ollie, anything else that's
Yeah.
that came up before we conclude? I know we're almost there.
Yeah, definitely. I can see there are new comments, but I had scrolled back because there was a really interesting kind of a bit of dialogue in the chat earlier on where Anne, and I hope you all don't mind me cracking it open. This is really, I think a lot of us, a lot of people in the sector may struggle with this. So Anne talked about how peer support groups are valuable to those needing validation that others share time with their shared lived experience. And then Joy responded, usually that isn't a public thing. Support groups generally gather in private location. And I responded, they may want to gather in the community together too. That's their choice, not ours. And Marie Lynn chimed in, we can facilitate making sure that it's a genuine choice as well. If the only option is to stay home or go to the mall with your roommates, that's not a choice, that's an ultimatum. If it's, do you want to go to the mall, the bookstore, or somewhere else? Do you want to go alone? Call someone join you to join you, see if roommates want to go, then that's more of a choice. And then too often we mistake the default as a choice.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Yeah,
there was some
absolutely.
back and forth around, and I think part of it has to do with, people, people with disabilities we happen to be supporting. They may want to gather together. We may be, with good intentions, gathering people together, but not providing an alternative. It's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating, Al. I'm going to stop talking and let you chime in.
Yeah, those are really good thoughts, Oli. I don't have a whole lot more to add to that other than, I mean, support groups or groups like, for example, I'm a member of the Italian Sons and Daughters of America, right? And that in that world, I have social capital with other Italians, right? But that's not my only outlet, right? I mean, I have other outlets as well. So, I mean, people can be a part of a support group or a affinity group of some sort that's very unique to them, a cancer support group or what. I mean, those things are okay. I'm not actually suggesting otherwise. What I am suggesting is that we broaden the opportunity for multiple experiences based upon interest, not just based upon my disability self or my Italian self, but just based upon, what I care about and what I'd like to know more about and what I think I can contribute in. And it's creating those opportunities. So I don't think I'm not bad rapping support groups at all. I mean, that folks find solace in a support group based on some issue. Well, my dad, for example, when he had Parkinson's and got involved in a Parkinson support group that he would go to, and it was good. It was helpful. There was a lot of good ideas that came out of there that helped my dad with his daily living, some tips and hacks that we could do as a family to make life easier for my dad. And those were great. But, that didn't prevent us and my dad from participating in the Pittsburgh Jazz Society, the Printers Association, other groups that he had an interest in. Right? So that I think support groups are fine, but they shouldn't be the only thing.
Right. If we get fixated on that as being the sole thing,
That's exactly right.
we're losing.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
We lost our
Yeah.
North Star.
Right. That's right. Exactly correct, Wally. So, you know,
Yeah, go
if
ahead.
there's any subsequent questions, or we're at 3 o'clock, we don't want to tie folks longer than the bargain. So if there's any other questions, or if there's anything you think I could benefit from, or you know, learn from, please drop me a note. Let me know, guide me there. And we meet again our next session, and hopefully you'll be involved. There's a lot of good stuff that we're going to be examining as we look at community mapping. But that next section is scheduled for next Tuesday, and that's at 1 o'clock, and that's the 6th of February. Is that correct, Oli? Tuesday,
that's correct.
February 6th.
1
And
p.m.
then the
Central
last
Time.
session is the following Tuesday, the 13th. And that's also at 1 o'clock Central Time. So hopefully you'll be able to join us next week. We're going to look at community mapping and understanding community resources. And then the last session is understanding community infrastructure, focusing on gatekeepers. So we hope to see you with us those next two, but no, we're recording these so that if you're not able to make it, you can always check in on the recording after the fact. So, Oli, last word on your birthday.
Well, thank you. Oh, just a couple things. Someone was asking about the slide that has your contact information. That is actually on the PowerPoint that would have been emailed to you. So just scroll to the last slide. You'll be able to find that. Otherwise, thank you, Al. I can't think of a better way to spend my birthday than with you talking about helping people build strong, lasting connections and relationships. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Thanks, everybody.
My wife might have something to say about that, but great. Thank you, Al. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great week, folks.
We'll see you next week. Oh, and we'll talk tomorrow, Al. I'll send you that Zoom link as
That's
well.
right. Yeah, get that to me, Oli, and we'll look forward to it.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks so
See
much.
you then. Bye now.